Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the final webinar of the National Biodiversity Assessment 2025 webinar series. I hope I am audible, and please excuse my voice. I'm still recovering from the flu. Um, Thank you for taking the time to join us today. Over the past few months, we've covered a wide range of topics related to the NBA 2025, and today we'll be looking back at some of the highlights from the series while also looking ahead to what comes next. My name is Chandra Yuffel, and I'm a project manager at Sanby. I've been involved in the NBA 2025 process since early 2024. Although my work with Sanby started before that through the CREW program, where I was involved in plant monitoring work that contributes to the NBA. And moving forward, I'm going to switch off my camera for bandwidth reasons. Um, and joining us today is our keynote speaker, Carol Poole, who has played a leading role in the NBA 2025 process. I will be taking you through the opening slides before handing over to Carol. Um, so before we begin, I'd like to briefly walk you through today's program. We will start with a quick reminder of what the NBA is and acknowledge the many people and institutions that contributed to NBA 2025. Um, we will start, we'll then recap the different NBA 2025 products, where to access the information and data sets, and some of the key findings. Carol will also take us through some of the innovations introduced in the NBA 2025, explain how to correctly cite NBA information, discuss the purpose of the What's New section on the website, and share some thoughts on how the NBA will continue to evolve in future. We'll finish with a wrap-up on knowledge gaps, research priorities, and opportunities for all of us to contribute to future biodiversity assessments. Please feel free to post questions in the chat throughout the presentation, and we'll address them during the discussion session at the end. So before handing over to Carol, I would like to briefly remind everyone about the scope of the NBA. The NBA assesses biodiversity across three broad areas: ecosystems, species, and more recently, genetic diversity. For ecosystems, the assessment covers terrestrial, freshwater, estuarine, marine realms, as well as our coastal and subantarctic environments, providing a comprehensive picture of biodiversity across South Africa. We are very proud to be the first country to assess all our ecosystems across all realms using the Red List of Ecosystems framework of the IUCN. For species, the NBA draws on the work of many experts and partner organizations to assess the conservation status of a wide range of taxonomic groups using internationally recognized IUCN standards. Genetic diversity is a newer area of work, but an increasingly important one, helping us understand the resilience and adaptability of species and ecosystems. South Africa is once again at the forefront, piloting these new global indicators and reporting on them in the NBA. All this innovative work where South Africa is one of the global leaders, a lot it takes a lot of effort. None of this work would be possible without the many partners and contributors who provide data, expertise, and support throughout the assessment process. This slide highlights just some of the institutions that contributed to the NBA 2025. The assessment was truly a collaborative effort involving more than 490 contributors from approximately 110 institutions and organizations across South Africa and beyond. Together, these contributors invested around 23,000 person days of work over the course of the assessment cycle. This level of collaboration is one of the greatest strengths of the NBA. It brings together researchers, government officials, conservation practitioners, NGOs, universities, and many other stakeholders who all share a commitment to improving our understanding of biodiversity. And on behalf of Sanvi, I would like to extend a sincere thank you to everyone who contributed their time, expertise, and data to make NBA 2025 possible. With that, I'm now handing over to Carol Poole, who will take us through the rest of today's presentation.
Thanks, Chandra. Hi, everyone. I'm Carol Poole. I'm a project manager at Sandy, both for the NBA and often for large donor-funded projects associated with the NBA. So I'm in Directorate Biodiversity Assessments. I have been privileged to be involved in both NBA 2018 and NBA 2025, and I'm the lead author on this document that we call the Contextual and Operational Framework document that we published in 2024, and it's available on the SANBI website. I think Sankeet's going to post a link to the chat in the chat. This is our why and how of the NBA. And even though NBA started 20 years ago in 2004, this sort of process and background document had not been published before. So this sets out the context of the NBA, its objectives, it clarifies the approach that we take and how we do each NBA cycle. And even though this document is, of course, very South Africa focused, we are now able to share this process document with other countries who hope to undertake a similar assessment of their own. Previously, as most of you will know, the NBAs came out in 2005, 2012, and 2019, so about 7 years apart. They consist of very large synthesis reports, numerous technical documents, massive big tomes. I remember Kerry Sink having like the marine technical report on her desk, and they would stack up. Lots of supplementary material, data sets, and of course, these PDFs were often out of date almost as soon as they became available. Also, the NBAs were called NSBA 2004, NBA 2011, NBA 2018. So theoretically, the year of their data, not the year of their release. The release was often a year after. And even that caused a lot of confusion because the data in each NBA can actually be any year leading up to the release. For example, a certain taxonomic group might be assessed for its threat data several years before an NBA is released, or a protection level analyses might take place sort of just before the release to make sure that we're using the most up-to-date protected area layers, So things needed to change. And now for NBA 2025, we've simplified the forms of what you can access of the NBA, making sure actually you can access things more easily, and getting it quickly. So there's still a summary book that you can download, and there's a need for some kind of short overall product. We know that. Looks good for the minister to hold it up or in photographs. However, for the first time at this NBA, there is an enormous website with over 108 pages, I think it was at the last count, and thousands of images and plots and maps and links to journal papers and other downloadable resources such as data sets. And it's really these sort of products and the way forward for these products that I want to talk to you about today, because we've really moved the NBA into the information age. In fact, we published a journal paper about that very intention in 2023, and the link will be shared in the chat if you want to look at that journal paper, where we proposed what it was we were going to try and do. It was all theoretical back then, several years ago, of course. Right. So in addition to the summary book and the website, I just want to note that all the NBA spatial data sets are now online on BGIS, and the next update of the NBA website, we'll be ensuring that the relevant pages on the NBA website link through to the relevant pages on BGIS. So when you land on the BGIS link, it's an overall landing page, and then you can click on one of the realms and it'll take you through to a realm page, and then on the right-hand side of the realm pages are the data sets associated with that realm. And so please don't hesitate to email the NBA email address if you're having any problems downloading the spatial data sets. We do apologize, it took us a bit longer than we had hoped to get the spatial data sets available to everyone. The launch happened in December. Then we were busy with the 7th National Report to the CBD. So please forgive us that it took a bit of time. This is the sorts of workflows that are being resolved as we move forward. Okay, so as promised, this webinar is a little bit of a reflection, a recap of the NBA findings. So here's the one slide that talks to the findings of NBA 2025, the threat status and protection level of species and ecosystems. These are the so-called headline indicators of our national biodiversity assessment. Genetics, we had a discussion, do the genetic indicators become headline indicators? Yes, they might well do in later NBAs. At the moment, because they're still being piloted and tested and there's insufficient taxonomic groups, for example, which I'll get to later, at the moment, the 4 headline indicators are sticking with ecosystems and species. We know that you as users are quite familiar with these graphs. They have been used, the same format has been used since the very first NBA. So it's very, very easy to read. You know, the dark red is the critically endangered in terms of the 2 threat status graphs. The dark green is the well protected in terms of the protection level graphs. So more than half of the species across the taxonomic groups are classified as least concern, this light green, but we know that our freshwater fishes and cartilaginous fishes are the most threatened species groups. You'll see that there's a lot more rows now in the species threat status graphs. This is because the species teams have done really fantastic work over the last 6 or 7 years to undertake more taxonomic groups. And of course, reassessing as many groups as possible. And then, of course, of the groups assessed for protection level in species, you'll see that the freshwater fishes sort of remain the least well protected of the taxonomic groups. For ecosystems, nearly half, there's 986 ecosystem types that were assessed using the IUCN Red List of Ecosystems criteria in NBA 2025, and nearly half of them are threatened. So threatened category means all 3, critically endangered, endangered, and vulnerable. And you can see here by this graph. Rivers, wetlands, estuaries, highly threatened. And you can see they're actually the least protected as well. And that really reflects in the coast as well, because the coast is an amalgamation of, obviously, estuarine, all estuaries, and some threat and some terrestrial and marine types. So really all coming together at our coast. But the NBA is way more than the headline indicators. So please do go and look at watch the webinars you've missed. Zamkita's already posted a link to the Zambi YouTube channel where all the webinars are available to you. They really we've had some excellent webinars. There's one on marine types, there's one on the new species assessed in the NBA 2025, there's a freshwater one, etc., etc. So really do go and have a look at the webinars. But the website is really your place to go, right? There is so much information in this website. When you land on the homepage, nba.zambi.org.za, it has some quick links at the top, and it has some, quick links on that landing page already to take you to some quick things. But don't forget, there's an absolutely brilliant search function. It really works well. So go and try it out. It'll give you everything that returns that search term, which is great. Our media tab here will have all the communication initiatives, which is ongoing work. So we'll eventually have the links to the webinars there as well. There's been there's films, there's more films coming about NBA 2025 results. So, keep checking back there, especially if you make use of the NBA for awareness raising or educational purposes. We will load more media there. And then, of course, on the left-hand side, and if you click on contents there, it pops up the big left-hand side menu. The profile and importance pages here, vital for those of you, again, who do education and awareness work. It's the most up-to-date kind of version of what is South Africa's biodiversity, how special it is, and why is it important. We will continue to update these things. Obviously, things come out, like the plant checklist comes out every year. So there's already a 2026 plant checklist. This is using 2025 data, but it's your best possible thing. And we will obviously update the biodiversity profile now on an ongoing basis because it's now on a website, which is much easier to update. If you're looking for just top simplified things, The key messages and the integrated findings are your place to go. But of course, don't forget to delve into the realms and the species and the genetic work. There's loads and loads and loads of information here. And then just to say, at the very bottom of every single web page, there's a really important menu. That's the acknowledgements, it's the how to cite, the what's new. I'm going to tell you about some of those. The summary of priority actions and knowledge gaps is also quite important, but I just want to say that several of the realm pages and the species pages also contain knowledge gaps and research priorities, for example. And about the NBA, I mean, that gives you the context that I've been talking about. And don't forget, here at the bottom is a clickable link through to the NBA email address, which currently comes to me, but I will make sure it gets to the correct people. Right. So how did we make this amazing website happen? This lovely diagram was done by Dr. Lisa von Staden. She was one of the driving forces behind what would become known as the NBA 2025 Core Data Team. And what we really wanted to make sure about was that you as users would have access to the input data. That hasn't always been the case for other NBAs. Now, it's obviously also not always possible, right? There's some sensitive species information that we cannot share publicly, or other, there's certain things that cannot be shared publicly. But as where possible, our input data are stored now in a repository that you can access as best possible. Then there's a whole bunch of code, right? I'm not a data scientist, but you can just imagine. There's a whole bunch of code on Python or SQL or R or whatever they use to run the analyses, the scientists. Summary statistics, so things like, the species list, it's not a spatial data set, but it's certainly an Excel spreadsheet, of the species results, for example. So we have this whole data analysis grouping of things that are also accessible. And then the production of the web content. And this is happening via something called Corto, which is an R add-on, it's R Studio. And it's all, again, linked through via GitHub so that you can access it. Obviously, there's a big GitHub NBA website page, and all the contributors have the separate realms, and the separate components have their own GitHub repositories, and that's all being controlled now very, very systematically, which is very useful. Okay, and we also wrote a standard operating procedure for this website content, and this is sort of not a very pretty diagram that summarizes the work. So obviously, step one is where the key authors, the scientists, are developing the technical workflow. The slide I just showed you. They're developing the input data sets, the code, writing the analysis, running the analyses, checking the analyses, and then producing the narrative of the web page. Now, this takes most of the time. I mean, you'll understand that of this whole flow diagram, this is probably 80%, 90% of the work, right? Then there's some kind of technical review of content. This is the peer review of the NBA. Previously, the synthesis report from NBA 2018, for example, had an official peer review. It went out to a bunch of international reviewers and things like that. But now the NBA process is that each module of work, so each technical module of work has its own peer review process. Just as a cross-check, double-check, are the scientists doing things correctly? We also peer review each other, of course. So the estuaries will look at the marine people, and marine people will look at the estuaries, etc. Then, of course, there's now a whole copy editing element. Of course, that happened previously with the technical reports, but you can imagine website content needs a very close eye in terms of copy editing, and then corrections to that copy editing. And then there's this whole Corto step. So we trained ourselves in Corto. Even I had to learn Corto because I did a lot of copy editing. So we trained ourselves on how to use that R Studio program. We made sure that everyone on that core data team had knowledge of Corto, and that we could all use that programming. If we didn't, then we made sure if the component lead, for example, didn't work in Corto, we had a backup plan. A lot of the documentation was done in Microsoft Word. gone even through this review stage in Microsoft Word, and then it would be uploaded to Corto as the final step. So then there's a sort of final checks and more final checks in the Corto itself. Andrew Skoner and I and Lisa von Staden spent many late nights and many days, weekends, before the launch, checking the online content. And that's really, the final step before approval. And obviously our managers in Sandy also had sight of all of that. Then, of course, there was this big thing. Is it going to work? Is it going to work by the time of the launch event? That was, I suppose Lisa had some sleepless nights there, but of course it worked. It was actually live a couple of days before the launch event, which was great. And now, of course, we're in this process of like, oops, there was a mistake. We didn't see that. Bound to happen, human error. Let's make some corrections. And then today I'm going to tell you a little bit more about updates that might happen in future. All right, so why did we go to all this trouble? Now, I remember the late, great Professor Bob Scholes speaking to us at a strategic advisory committee meeting of the NBA 2018 process about what makes a good scientific assessment. And that was like up to more than 10 years ago. And he had been involved in journal papers about these kinds of pillars and elements that you're looking for. And we've really strived hard over the last few years to tackle these for the NBA, right from the start of the NBA, in fact. And so, relevance, salience, of course, like see webinar number 9 last week by Pradil, explains exactly how the NBA was used. It's got 7 objectives, multiple uses of the NBA. And it's actually, we wrote a journal paper about this that was published in late 2025. I think Zim's going to share a link to that too. This is not an open access paper, so some of you won't be able to read it. If you're interested in this paper about the uptake of the NBAs, you can always request it from the authors. And I'm one of them, so you can email me. All right. So in terms of credibility, the NBA now uses the international standards, right? So in NSBA 2004, South Africa, we invented the threat status and protection level analyses, right? That was before the IUCN Red List of Ecosystem Standards. In 2016, when that international standard came in, our teams were actually very involved with the IUCN RLE team to say, okay, what's working, what's not working in a megadiverse country. So, our people have been involved in writing and developing and testing the international standards. So that's really speaks to the credibility of the NBA. Legitimacy, multiple authors, multiple contributors, multiple reviewers. Hopefully this, this peer review thing, making sure that it becomes a product of the whole biodiversity sector. It's definitely not a Sandy product. There's multiple people involved, as Chandra mentioned. Repeatability, that was Andrew's big bugbear, right? Andrew Skoner, who led NBA 2018 and NBA 2025, he kept saying, what happens if I couldn't remember what I did with that spreadsheet that I got had in 2018, and I couldn't remember my method and my, the steps I went through. So the big drive from Andrew for this NBA 2025 was about making sure that the code and the steps were visible. And so that if there's staff turnover or if something needs to be rerun because, oops, something went wrong with the input data set, it's now much, much easier to do that. And then finally, the big one that we wanted to make sure about was this transparency issue. The fact that you can see all of those steps from the input data through to the code, through to the outputs, and the spatial data sets that are the results of the NBA. And that makes version control a lot better as well. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. And when I talk about citing the NBA, it's now very clear what's what and what data sets or what date. All right. Let's move on. Okay, so here we are on the how to cite. Okay, I wanted to touch on 2 major things, right? The change to this online platform has been enormous. It's not just the work, but also the change management that goes with these big innovations. Our scientists are no longer just ecologists, they're also data scientists as well. And that means we're also dragging you, the user, along into the information age. So I'm going to tell you about two things that to me are the most important things for you to know as the users. Number one is about citing the NBA. This has become more complicated previously. And what we did when we did that paper about uptake of previous NBAs, it was quite easy to do some search functions on Google Scholar and whatever, because it was quite easy. People don't necessarily cite the NBA, and if they were citing the NBA, they were citing the synthesis report, and often it was SANBI 2019, and eventually we gave the synthesis report dual citation so that it would recognize the scientists involved, so it became SCONO et al. 2019 and SANBI 2019. Very important, like all the IPBES assessments have dual citations so that we make sure we recognize the scientists behind it. But now it's become even more complicated. So please, your absolute priority is that you use the recommended citation at the bottom of each technical page of the website. Okay, so if it has a recommended citation, you will see it on the right-hand menu there of each technical page. It will have a subheading called recommended citation. You'll often see names at the top of that page, and then you know it's a technical page and there will be a recommended citation for that technical page. So here is example is Diaram et al. For the South Africa's biodiversity profile. Anisha was the primary person that helped with a whole bunch of other people to put together the 2025 biodiversity profile. Please use that recommended citation if you are quoting from the profile. NBA does have an overall citation, NBA 2025, but you only use this if you have no other choice. It's there on the How to Cite page. The summary book also has its own citation, obviously, so that's quite important. If you're pulling something out of the summary book, you cite it as SANBI 2025. And then we've put there, the authors also get recognition. Then, of course, there's input data sets, there's output spatial data sets, there's R packages, etc. We are trying to make sure that the metadata that comes with all of those things has recommended citations for you. So please go ahead, and again, if you've got any questions about this kind of thing, rather just email us and ask than winging it. And yeah, right. I didn't move on for some reason. Okay, second of all is the What's New page. Currently, this is accessible from the bottom menu, but we're actually exploring to put it at the top right-hand menu, perhaps in forthcoming updates. So this page at the moment lists what was new between NBA 2018 and NBA 2025. So it spoke about the new species groups that had been assessed, or that there was new ecological condition data, etc. In future, though, it will highlight when new web pages have been added or when statistics have been updated. So this is really your go-to place. Put our little half-collared kingfisher here, thanks to Tim Caper and all the other people who donated images. Isn't he lovely? So you're going to have to check back regularly, like our little kingfisher, to the web page, because it will tell you what's new. The URL will never change. So you can save that as a favorite and then just refresh all the time. And it really does, because of these ongoing changes, it really does mean you have to pay attention to that citation thing. So when there's an update to a technical page, let's say Anisha's profile gets updated because there's now a 2026 plant checklist, that recommended citation will be updated and it will say, etc., so-and-so, etc., 2026 or 2027. Okay, so this is the way you know that you're using the most up-to-date information from the NBA. I hope that makes sense. Right. Okay, so what does all this mean for the next NBA? And I put it in quotation marks on purpose. So let's remember the history. 4 NBAs to date over 20 years, approximately 7 years apart each, but this is not going to be necessary anymore. The website can and will be updated whenever there's something new, right? The NBA the work never stops, and already the scientists are planning their work for the next while, checking on the major gaps that need filling, writing fundraising proposals, ensuring that the vital partnerships are continuing or that there are new partnerships emerging. And for NBA 2025, we made a huge effort to time its release to just before the 7th National Report was due to the CBD in February. Now, the next national report, the 8th National Report, is theoretically ready. It must be ready by June 2029. That's quite soon. Is there going to be a big launch event and a big release before June 2029? I'm personally not sure. And when we had our reflection meeting of the major kind of NBA governance structures, the answer to this question was maybe. We definitely need to think about it. There's pros and cons to a release event being more regular than, say, 5 to 7 years like it has been in the past. But there's many other considerations as well. It's not only about the CBD, for example. There's all the other international conventions, like the SDGs uses NBA results, the UN CCD uses the NBA results. So many other considerations about the timing of NBA releases, many other objectives of the NBA that have nothing to do with global reporting. You know, here's the objectives of the NBA, just so that you all know. Pradil touched on these in last week's webinar, so please go and check on that. There's many objectives that don't care about when it is released. Of course, the formal release event does serve a purpose. There's lots of media coverage, lots of awareness raising, excellent political engagements at the time. It results in some kind of interdepartmental, interministerial work, you know, but yeah. And the other question that we have to ask, and I see some Keita's already popped the poll into the chat, is what are the products? What are the next products besides the website? Are we going to do a summary book again? Or should we rather be switching to other kinds of short format materials that might be even more useful than an entire summary book, such as policy briefs or fact sheets or whatever? So we'd love your opinion on this. So here's the poll. Please go and submit your answer to the poll, and we will look at all the answers shortly. Okay. Go on. Right. So let's briefly touch on some of the biggest gaps for the next NBA, again in quotation marks, because it's ongoing work. These are the generalized items found on the actual web page. We've got a web page called Priority Knowledge Gaps and Research Priorities. So let me just quickly go through them, but please note that there is a lot of detail in the realm and the species pages as well about particular things that need to happen for those specific components. These are sort of the generalized knowledge gaps. So the mapping and classification of South Africa's aquatic systems, especially riparian areas, wetlands, and the deep sea, remains challenging. Lots of ongoing work there. We keep refining those maps. I mean, even the terrestrial map keeps being refined, but the aquatic ones in particular, there's some major updates coming. Ecological condition data underpins the Red List of Ecosystems assessments. That has been one of the biggest gaps to date that I know of in for the RLE, to run all criteria in the RLE. So that's a huge ongoing body of work. Some of it's being funded by our current regional project. So we'll have a South African regional baseline to work from by the end of that project. For species, many invertebrate groups. You can see we've added several inverted taxonomic groups to the species that have been assessed. But there's many, many more invertebrate groups, and they just lack sufficient information for red list assessments, so especially, again, the aquatic, the marine, the estuarine, the freshwater species. There's also very limited capacity for repeat assessments. So, for example, Klingiwi does the plant reassessments. We can only do a 900 sample of plant assessments. There's 20,000 odd plants in the country. How on earth can we keep them, the red list assessments, up to date? We have to end up picking and choosing which ones we assess, and that's not an ideal situation. Ideally, we would like to have the capacity to be able to reassess all species within a taxonomic group at any one time. And here I'd just like to have a shout out to the the entities like BirdLife South Africa or Endangered Wildlife Trust, who do help us do repeat assessments for the birds and the mammals, respectively. Genetic work, right? Quite big gaps, expand the taxonomic coverage. We need to embed genetics into the mainstream biodiversity assessment workflows, you know, so if we're collecting foundational species data, are we collecting the foundational genetic data at the same time? Improving biological realism. I'm not a genetic expert, but from what I understand from Jessica, this is about including transboundary populations as well. You know, we genetically, certain species groups that they don't, you know, adhere to political boundaries, or maybe they do because they're fenced in, you know, so it depends on the species, etc. As I say, this is just a snapshot of some of the gaps. Generally, we've got an actual key message about this, that long-term biodiversity monitoring is absolutely essential. That means site-based monitoring of pressures, of species, and then long-term monitoring of specific species at larger scales across, you know, not just at site level. Indicators and stats linking biodiversity and human well-being. This, I think, is really, really important. Many of the global assessments, such as the IPBES assessments or what's called the national ecosystem assessments that are promoted, are using partly social science and deciding on the priorities for that assessment. You know, is it water ecosystem services that are our priority in that country, and therefore you're assessing the availability of those ecosystem services. We've started some work here. We've got lots of lovely stats of like biodiversity and tourism, and you know what biodiversity means in that importance page. But I do think we are needing to do some more social science integrated work. Counterfactual impact evaluation on the effectiveness of interventions and responses. So it's probably one of the biggest things that's not really happening in South Africa. I'm sure there's really good examples, but as an overall, are we actually monitoring our responses, and are our responses effective enough? KBAs, our first kind of comprehensive reassessment of KBAs came out in 2 years ago. So, you know, can we strategically use that information, and how are we going to use it? Can we do an assessment at that site level? Are we using the KBAs as part of our suite of tools for fundraising and things like that? Yeah, so please do delve into the detail in terms of your area of expertise on the particular web page that you might be interested in, or the particular NBA component. Okay, so obviously, yeah, the gathering the input data for the next NBA has already begun. Here's some key email addresses that you might need. I think most of you know the component leads already. There's a couple of like marine map at sanby.org.za or veg map at sanby.org.za. There's a couple of generic email addresses, but other than that, I think you know the leaders. And if you're ever in doubt, just email nba@sanby.org.za. Okay. As the Deputy Minister said at the launch event, the National Biodiversity Assessment gives us the knowledge to act. Now it's up to all of us to turn this knowledge into lasting change for nature and our people. So this was just to say that even though the scientists have started the next NBA, there's a huge amount of work that goes on using NBA 2025 results. You are all users of the NBA data and information. You're all mainstreaming the NBA results and data sets into practice and policy and research and awareness and education, etc. Let us know how you're using it and why. Send us suggestions, send us examples. You know, when we wrote that paper on the uptake of the NBAs, we made it very clear that this was the first attempt to actually measure uptake. And it's extremely hard because not everything is cited, not everything, you know, Mandy Driver used to say to me, the fact that the National Biodiversity Assessment is not mentioned in South Africa's National Spatial Development Framework is actually fine, because maybe our mainstreaming has really been a success. When it's not mentioned by name, but every terminology like ecological infrastructure and threatened ecosystems, all that terminology that we use and have used in the NBA since 2004 is in the National Spatial Development Framework, a national framework for South Africa's development. It's amazing, you know. So maybe the true success of the NBA is that nobody even knows that they're using NBA information. Anyway, don't forget all the ongoing work now. And then just a final word from me, this core data team that has built the website and made it all happen has been nominated for an NSTF award. That's the National Science and Technology Forum. Watch out for the results. It's on the 16th of July. And just a big shout out to the whole team, all obviously led by Andrew Skono, who has since left Sambi, but you know, he was very proud to have led this team. And this award is a culmination of what we have been working hard at for the last few years. So thank you to everyone. I'm going to hand back to Chandra, and Chandra, can you see the results of the poll? I'm going to actually just see if I can look at that. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, I can see the results of the poll, yeah.
All right, do you want to tell us what the votes were?
So the first one, the summary of findings and key messages is essential. It was 52%, so 13 people voted. And no, only short policy briefs or summaries per topic, 24%. That was 6, and I'm not sure was also 6 people voted.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. I mean, it's always useful to get everyone's perspective. If you guys are saying the summary book is essential, we will look at that for the next round. Thanks, everyone. Over to you, Chandra.
Thank you so much, Carol, for that insightful presentation and for sharing both the achievements of the NBA 2025 and the exciting direction for future assessments. Before we close, I'd like to check whether there are any final questions or comments from participants. Please feel free to raise your hand or post your questions in the chat. We have about 3 minutes before we end the session. All right, Laura, can you unmute yourself?
Yes. Thank you, Carol. That was a lovely summary, as always, much appreciated. I was wondering about our formal structured engagement at the country level moving forward around our lessons learned. Carol highlighted the fact, for instance, that we did protection levels first, and then there was a little bit of a IUCN moving past us. And I sometimes felt like they could have talked to us a little bit more. And I was just wondering, I'm assuming, I don't know how much Sanby is involved with that moving forward, and maybe also because we're a bit of a community, if we formalizing that a bit more, or I mean, like, it's a push-pull. I know we're not in charge of that because they're a big global organization. But I felt like we had more to offer, and they possibly didn't have the richness of our experience at their full disposal. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. That's really great input. And yes, we do have eyes and ears and hands and legs in those processes. So I don't know if Dividine's here. Dividine's you've just come back from the IUCN SIS, like the species SIS work. Like, do you want to jump in here? Lingiwe's on like the international panels. Mapale also, you know, feeds into the red list of ecosystem processes. Dividine, do you want to come in very briefly and just say where you were just recently?
Yes, sorry, I missed Laura's full comment. So on the species side, our work is really strongly linked to the international IUCN's red listing. All of our endemic species are published globally. And recently, I've also been involved in updating the system used to globally assess species. So there's a very strong coordination between South Africa and the global work on species red listing. And then also, sorry. Yeah, I think that's it. We're all well connected, and we do influence what happens with the red listing. So I don't think on the species side we're that out of the loop.
Yeah. No, and I mean, just so you all know, like they're constantly asking South African scientists to help with updating guidelines, updating international, standards and things like that. The next one that's going to come is the Red List Index for species at the national level. Like we'll hopefully help update that guideline. And just so you know, the NBA process, the sequential process of mapping and assessing our species and our ecosystems and our genetic diversity, there's a massive consortium now of like bigwigs in the biodiversity sector, including IUCN, ZSL, WCMC. They're actually trying to replicate our model, and the one that I lead at the local regional level with the 4 countries, they're trying to replicate that to 20 biodiversity rich countries in the future, and they're going to start shouting about it at COP17 in the hopes to get the support. So they literally use our diagrams and use our stuff. So I think we're well embedded in international processes, and there's always more to do, of course, and the opportunities that we get to go to COPs and the various planning processes before the COPs and things like that are very important. And we don't always have the funding to go internationally, but let's hope we do get invited. When our scientists get invited, it's really important. I see there's a question in the chat as well. Thanks from Henry. I understand what you're saying. I'll talk to Lisa. We don't know whether to make the what's new kind of pop up on your screen, but that also might be annoying, right? If you're trying to just check back at the NBA website and you have like a what's new popping up on your screen, it's probably not advisable through Corto anyway. I think Lisa's already told me that. However, I get what you're saying. Like, is it going to just be every while about what's new, or will it be a running list of what's new? I'll talk to that. I'll talk to the team about it. We're still figuring it out. As I say, we might pop it up as a right-hand menu. Right. Any other hands or questions, Chandra? I don't see any more. Did I miss any?
No, I don't see any more either.
All right.
All
Over
right.
to you to close us off then.
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for joining us throughout this webinar series and for your continued interest in the NBA. And then just a reminder that the recordings of all 10 webinars will be available on the SAMBI YouTube channel. So please feel free to revisit them and share them with your colleagues. And we also encourage you to continue exploring the NBA 2025 website and making use of the resources, datasets, and information available there. Thank you again for joining us today, and we wish you all the best and looking forward to continue this journey with you and the NBA evolves into the future. Thank you.